All righty, all righty, all Rudy. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid narrator pilot Fraggeth, and today we're going to be reading more of ManFac by Martin Caidin, maker of the $6 million man. Well, creator thereof, anyway. Previously on, probably the biggest thing is that our boy, Lance Parker, has run through a gauntlet, made a significant step in his road to recovery, which is basically lived out in human civilization for a week as a gnarled accident victim, nuclear accident victim, which basically involves facing his own demons and his fears of how he's perceived. This culminates in basically a scuffle with a bunch of roughnecks at a bar, or a diner rather, which he doesn't quite get through unscathed, but he does survive. So he's been through it. That's the big one. I'm having to remember back 2 weeks while flipping through here. Oh, right. Also, Grazzi has made improvements to the ManFac system, so now it is a more functional simulacrum of him, looking like him but bulkier. So she's putting in work for this man. The way she does this is a bit, surely there must have been a better way, but at the same time, he wasn't listening to her, so it was the only way. Alrighty. I think with that we can get rolling. With any luck, we will get to the end of Book 2. And we will get to, at that point, I think the actual plot. Even then, it's still kind of vignette-y. At any rate, let's get rolling with more of ManFac. Chapter 15.
But you've only been back an hour.
Lee spun on her heel, furious, frustrated, helpless. She turned back to him.
God damn it, you're not ready to go out again. You're crazy. I don't care what happened down there, but...
He held up a hand. It only worsened the sight of the ugly bruise on his head. Now, I'm not sure if he's wearing the throat thing or not. I think it's safe to assume he probably is. The voice modulator. So I'm going to pretend he is. Voice modulating. He held up a hand. It only worsened the sight of the ugly bruise on his head. Lady, we made a deal. I was out there floundering like a fish out of water, and I learned to breathe air and talk and walk, and I got my diploma. I did it your way. All the way. Now, do you help me, or do I get into my tin soup by myself? He watched her, wavering, torn by indecision. Lee, if you don't help, you're going to have to stop me. Physically. Her shoulders slumped.
You really mean that?
Damned right.
9 feet tall and a yard wide, huh?
You bet your sweet ass. Isn't this what you wanted? No more belly aching, no more lamenting, right? His face hardened. Maybe it's time for you to graduate, Lee. Her eyes blazed.
All right, she said grimly. Let's go. I'll get things started.
She walked off stiffly, and he followed, not rushing, moving with that swing he'd developed. The cane was a part of him now. He could make it. It would take more time, but he knew he could devise a brace that would give him better balance, and he forced the future from his mind. What he wanted was now. He looked at himself in the mirror. He grinned. A thick and broad face set on a neck almost as thick. Stubble on the chin. Just what he wanted. The clothes, Lee. Any working man stuff?
Corduroy jeans, boots, a plaid shirt. You'll look like a lumberjack, for Christ's sake.
Just what the doctor ordered. Get it, please. He felt an incredible freedom. He knew Lee had several complete ManFac systems in the lab. She could change heads, change faces easily enough. He could choose any one of them. He chose this one. She returned with the clothes, and he dressed quickly before the mirror. 5 minutes later, a stranger looked back at him. He grinned. So did the stranger. He liked the son of a bitch. About 30 years old. Hi, he said, and so did the man in the mirror.
You're going back there,
Lee said. He held her gaze. Yes.
Is it really that important? I swear I'll never understand men.
Strong hands held her arms gently. You don't need to understand men. Just keep working on me. She stood without moving. Lance shrugged and walked from the laboratory. He went through the garage, along the ridge, then turned east until he stood at the last trees at the edge of the steep slope. Far below him he saw the lights of Stanley. He could make out the red neon sign of the bar. He was going to walk unannounced into that town. He started down, sliding, slamming his heavy boots into grass and dirt for balance. He felt he could do anything. He reached a dirt road and started across. He stopped dead as a huge shape rose before him in the dim moonlight. Holy Jesus! He swore quietly as he looked into the eyes of a great bear. The animal rumbled a snarl deep within its chest, sniffing him out. He saw teeth coming closer. He didn't know if he could outrun this beast. Something was wrong with it. Bears in these parts didn't mess with humans. This one wasn't following the rules. The snarl deepened. The son of a bitch was going to charge him. Lance reached up to his neck, felt the hard point beneath plastiskin, pressed it several times. He almost stepped back as the bear... I don't know why I'm having such a hard time. He almost stepped back as the bear advanced menacingly. No more time to waste. Lance threw his arms wide and stepped forward, toward the animal. Face to face with the beast, Lance roared. The power system picked up the vibrations, magnified it 10 times over the volume his own throat could ever produce. A thunderbolt of sound, the scream of some impossibly huge primal beast, shattered the night. The bear reared back, terrified, rolling in confusion from this unexpected adversary. It rushed off into the brush. Far below, the roar carried through the streets of Stanley and rattled windows. People stared up in wonder and unexplained fear. He walked slowly into the bar. Idle glances met him. The roughnecks sized him up. Elbows nudged friends for attention. A stranger, big bastard. No one knew who he was. Lance leaned against the hardwood bar. A man in a dirty apron looked at him.
What'll it be, Mac?
Beer. A bottle banged down before him.
$2, mister.
Lance brought the bottle up to his lips, drinking lightly. Run it up, he said after a pause.
Pay now.
Lance leaned forward and quietly gripped the bartender's wrist. He applied the pressure slowly and steadily. The first attempt to pull back the arm didn't work. The bartender's eyes widened. "Stay quiet," Lance said to him. "Just stay quiet."
Jesus, you're killing me,
the bartender said in a hoarse whisper, trying not to draw attention. "Run it up," Lance told him.
Yeah, anything you say. Just let loose, please.
Lance turned around, elbows against the bar. Then he saw him. The long, dirty hair, tank shirt, the tattoos. Lance walked slowly through the drunken crowd, and finally he stood before the table, looking down, smiling. The tough looked up. Conversation at the table fell away. "What do you want, buddy?" "You." He said it so quietly the other man was taken aback. Then he roared with laughter. "Me?" He turned to his friends. The grins spread. It promised to be good. This crazy son of a bitch was alone. Oh, man. They got ready. "You want me? You one of them fags or something? Take your fag dick and get the hell out of here before I take you apart." "Get up." The smile was gone. "Mister, you're messing wrong, you know that? You're alone. You're crazy. You want me up, you get me up." Lance's hand shot out faster than the man could follow. Two steel fingers closed on the tough's nose. He yelped in pain, trying to move, his hands grabbing at the terrible pressure. Blood was already running down his face, trickling through Lance's fingers. Lance looked around the table. "Nobody move. He's mine." He squeezed tighter. There was a shrill scream as flesh and bones pulped together. Blood bubbled out in a froth.
What the hell's he doing to him?
"Look at the blood, man! He's killing him!" Lance pulled his hand away. He looked at white bone showing through torn flesh, and then it was all covered with the bubbling blood. The man staggered to his feet, still screaming, stumbling blindly. "Kill him!" But Lance wasn't there. He did what nobody expected. He went forward swiftly, his foot coming up into the table, and a loud crack snapped through the room like a shot as wood splintered and flew wildly in all directions. The man on the opposite end of the table seemed to levitate as the heavy boot crashed into his groin. He crashed to the floor a dozen feet away, writhing in agony. Lance whipped about, ready for whatever would come at him. They were faster than he believed, every man Jack among them an experienced, tough brawler. He grinned. So much the better. But he had hesitated too long, and a fist crashed into his mouth. The impact jerked his head back slightly, but the man who had swung howled in dismay as several finger bones and knuckles cracked against the impact of hitting the equivalent of a lightly padded steel pole. Caught by surprise, Lance hesitated but a second, and it was a second too long as several bodies hurled through the air to slam into him. Their combined weight staggered him backward, and he crashed against a wall, splintering boards and shattering glass. He came alive with a startling fury. A short chop to the side of a nearby head, and the man fell like a polled oxen. Lance moved expertly, starting finally to bob and weave, his powerful left hand stabbing outward into chins and noses and cheekbones and foreheads in rapid-fire fashion. Every blow struck sent the hapless recipient sprawling or tumbling wildly backward. He had his back solidly to a wall. As men rushed forward, they were smashed with steel battering rams. Lips split, cheekbones were laid bare, knees and legs broke under the piston-like feet of ManFac strength. And still they came, several from each side. Lance ducked and bobbed and weaved, his fists great steel poles. Then an axe handle came from nowhere to smash across his own nose. The splintering sound was both wood and plastiskin and flex metal, and the blow was so severe Lance felt his own blood within the ManFac. He bellowed with his own pain and threw himself forward, scattering his attackers with a terrible fury until he reached the one he wanted. He hauled him upward until the other man's feet dangled above the floor. Other men rushed at Lance. A madness was upon them, all of them, including himself, and he knew that soon people would be killed. He didn't want that. He held the kicking, dangling figure higher, and Lance stood erect, and he used that strange other weapon again. One word. Stop! That terrible noise hit them with brutal impact, its effect heightened by the total surprise of an explosion in their midst. They looked about them, bewildered, ears ringing, befuddled, still feeling the vibrations common to sudden severe overpressure. It began to dawn on them that the roar had indeed come from this incredible stranger in their midst. Lance snapped his arm from one side to another so they might have the full effect of a large man hanging from a hand, hanging and being shaken as if he were a featherweight rag doll. For the first time, a touch of fear began to spread through the midst of brawlers, who would normally fight to the point of unconsciousness before they gave in to any such weakness. They watched silently as Lance drew back a ham-like fist, held it poised to destroy the twitching figure in his other hand. He waited several seconds and released his grip on the man's hair. He never hit him. He didn't need to. That long hanging in air had done it. The man on the floor scrabbled away on his hands and knees. They stared at each other, the stranger and the brawling mob, and it was an impasse that lasted but a few seconds more. Then sound intruded to break the eerie standoff. Sirens and the squeal of tires.
Holy shit! Police!
The shout was unnecessary. This mob knew only too well its one common enemy, the law breaking up one of their spirited parties. Lance stepped backward slowly until he felt the wall behind him. Scuffling and running and overturned tables and chairs, men yelling and women screaming, and people who'd done this 100 times before, diving through windows and climbing out bathroom exits and hitting the fire doors to stream away in all directions before sheriff's deputies and state troopers poured in through the front entrance and a fire exit of the building opposite him. He couldn't afford to be one of those standing up before a judge. No identification, no name, and a lot of trouble. But he didn't want to attempt a breakaway through a rear exit. Not smart. They'd be in position now. He had to do something completely unexpected. The deputy and trooper cars would be out front, strung along just off the highway, headlights pointed inward. That group at the opposite end of the building, to him, was the only smart way out. Beyond them was the fire exit. He remembered the area. Not big enough for any cars. They wouldn't bother posting anyone out there. Lance moved with the milling crowd toward the lawman. He crouched down to mix in with the noisy, shuffling group. Then he was about as far as he could go without being detected. He tensed up, remembered his training, the effects of mass and acceleration, reminded himself that he was 320 pounds packaged into a compact form. He leaned well forward, dug in his heels, and hurled himself forward like a small locomotive boosted by a powerful rocket charge. He went through unsuspecting bodies just like that locomotive going through wheat. People flew in all directions to his right and his left, and more than a few sailed over his lowered bull-like shoulders. He burst from the crowd without warning and charged madly into the thick of the unsuspecting lawmen. Before they could bring their clubs or guns into play, Lance had hurled them wildly aside and was through their middle, and through the door standing between himself and freedom. The instant he was in the cold night air, he spun on his heel and cut a sharp left, taking the steep upward slope without even slowing down. Seconds later, he was high in the thick brush, flat on the ground, silent, watching and listening with an impish grin as they tried to sort out what in the hell had happened down there. He waited several minutes. No one was coming up that hill. Another hard scan of the area. Lance grunted with satisfaction, turned, and went up the hill at a steady pace. Lee stared at him with wide eyes when he walked into the lab. She shook her head slowly.
Satisfied? She asked finally. He sprawled in an armchair, dwarfing it, nodding slowly.
It took a lot of barbed wire out of my belly, Lee.
He said it so quietly, with such meaning, she knew he had been right. She was prepared for boasting, bravado, war stories, the lot, but he'd brought back none of it. Just that quiet remark. There could be no argument with that. She went to him, looked at the blood and the ripped clothing. You must have done a number down there. I could hear the sirens. Sounds like they called out the National Guard. She studied his face. My God, what hit you? She asked. Her fingers probed the smashed nose. Is some of that blood yours? She went on, feeling sudden fear.
First question, an axe handle, I think. Second question, I think so. Third question before you ask. Yes, it hurts.
Without thinking, her hand moved through his hair. His hair. He's become that his hair. He's become that gestalt I hoped would happen. Even I accepted it without thinking. How incredible. You smell, Lance. Bad.
Beer, booze, sweat, blood. Lousy combination.
Time for a bath.
He looked up at her. Time, long overdue, for a bath together.
She nodded. She had her man again. Chapter 16. He ached more than he would ever admit to Lee. Ached through every muscle and joint. His teeth ached where he had unknowingly clenched them during the fracas in the bar. Even his bones seemed to wash pain through him. But he found as much pleasure, perverse though it might be, as he did his aches and pains. He felt that he had struggled back to life instead of lying prostrate like a wounded animal. His were the signatures of living, of movement, of greeting a shining and warming sun he had almost obliterated from his mind. He refused Lee's help, no matter how stiffly he moved, no matter what new pain rippled through him, as he hooked the ManFac supports to the system. He pressed the necessary releases to swing open his access panels to the ManFac. Once supported from the overhead cables, he powered down the system. For the first time since he had activated a ManFac, he felt no pain inside his heart or his mind by withdrawing. He had found himself, and he would be himself, walking half crippled on his cane or striding with magnificent power as the combination of man and facsimile. He withdrew from the ManFac, shedding an outer epidermis, marvelous and intricate, of beauty and strength. He hobbled back a short distance, and he had a new appreciation of that marvelous system. Lifeless, no angel to blow beautiful movement into those limbs. It lacks the fire, the divine spark. He nodded, at peace with himself. She lay sprawled in the long and wide tub, as lithe and yet as relaxed as a large jungle cat, her limbs moving gently to and fro by the force of the whirlpool jets. She in the tub, Lance still outside, very much in need of assistance. But she knew that the worst thing he could have happen to him right now would be her assistance. He was still nearing the summit of his personal mountain. He had laughed off his bruised pride and torn skin. He had gone forth again to seek his own personal catharsis. And he was back. Now, in the height of that new strength, there had come Lance's greatest struggle. For once that happened, she mused behind narrowed eyes, he would have gained a strength he had still not yet guaranteed. Strength of self. If he could complete this psychological maze, the highest obstacle yet of them all, the original Lance Parker, only stronger in spirit and resolve and inner confidence, would be here with her. Great events at times occur without the searing flashes of light, minus the blare of trumpets, free of the adoring roar of the crowd, unattended by announcements of proclamations. To Lee Grazzi this was such a moment. Silent except for his labored breathing, the creak of equipment, the occasional sound of metal against metal, he disengaged himself from that awesome physical might to return to the harshness of his own physical disfigurement, and then he was nude again before her, and without a shred of the self-consciousness that had always attended this occasion before. She looked up at him as he sat on the edge of the tub, feet in the water, content for this moment simply to sit, to regain his breath. She watched him without comment, and he chose not to intrude with words on this moment. Somehow it felt special. On a sudden whim he dragged himself to his feet, walking laboriously, more stiffly than was normal, to a work table. He returned to his former position, feet in the water, but this time he had a slim cigar in his teeth. He lit up slowly, savoring the smoke and the taste. Then he held her eyes. She lifted one eyebrow. "You look like hell," she told him. Lance's reaction was laughter. "Yesterday it would have been pride begotten withdrawal," she reminded herself. He dragged deeply on the cigar, removed it from his mouth, and looked at it vacantly. "I guess," he said after several moments, "I do look sort of silly. Clint Eastwood, I'm not." He threw away his cigar. "That's not what I meant," she said, stirring the water with her legs. "You should see yourself. You've got a bad bruise across your nose, and you're black and blue in a dozen places." He grinned. "It was worth it." "Get the hell in here, lover." He slid carefully into the water, supporting himself by his arms until his body rested on the tub bottom. She nodded approvingly. "Did you know your arms are stronger? Come to think of it, you've improved in almost all your physical conditioning."
Still a little short of leaping tall buildings in a single bound, he grunted. Maybe a hop, skip, and a jump first."
She ignored the remark. "Turn around. I've got oil. Time for you to get woman-to-man treatment."
"What happened to the doctor?"
"She doesn't take baths with her patients, dummy." She pulled gently on his arm. "Here, sit between my legs with your back to me." She waited until he was able to sit as she had instructed and still be able to lean his weight on the side of the tub with one arm. Without that bracing he would have lost his balance. He had come far. There was a hell of a journey still ahead of him. She kneaded his sore muscles, beginning with the back of his neck, working heat and love into his arms, then down his back and along his thighs. He leaned back, turning and moving as she prodded gently with her hands. He rested against the tub, his eyes shut with deep pleasure. Her hands moved slowly and lovingly along his ribs and about his stomach, and she placed her straightened legs beneath his body to bring him out of the water so she could work his groin and his legs with the oil. Through it all, not a word, not a sound, only that message clear and unmistakable on his face. Then she was done, her fingers caressing lightly along his toes and the bottom of his feet. His eyes opened wide and clear. He pulled himself to a higher position.
"My turn,"
he said finally, and if he had struck her a wicked blow, she could not have been more stunned with those two words. "My turn." "To rejoin the human race." Her neck, slowly, lovingly, with more strength than she dreamed he had regained in his hands. Still, he needed the back bracing, and she sat with her own back to him, between his legs, as his hands moved slowly with the oil, kneading tenderly, working her skin. He moved his finger beneath her arms and along her ribs, and then he froze, his hands cupped beneath her full breasts. Her nipples hardened instantly. She dared not move, afraid to break the magic spell. He remained as he was, and she could almost hear his own heart pounding. The miracle. He felt her move closer. She felt him hard, unbelievably marvelous, against her back. It had been more than 2 years. Her hand reached behind her, down his belly muscles. Then, with infinite slowness, she moved her fingertips over the entire surface of his penis. She felt him throb, heard his gasp of intense pleasure. Oh God, not right here, not yet, please, not yet. She moved from the tub, not turning to look at him. Unless that was her thinking that? I'm not sure. She moved from the tub, not turning to look at him, and she walked, her body glistening from oil and water, into her living room, where she kept a great spread of pillows on a thick rug. She was afraid to turn, afraid to see if he had followed her, if that marvelous, throbbing hardness was there. She heard Lance moving, and then his body next to hers. She turned slowly, and their lips came together in a deep and searing kiss that had been torn from her life all this terrible time. His body moved to hers, and she shifted to ease his entry. No. The words spit from him as if he'd thrust a knife at her. Don't move. Don't do a thing. Lie there. Be loved. She avoided even an answer as he explored her body, caressed and kissed and touched as if each movement of his own body were an exploration never before made. In a way it was, and she closed off her mind and sank back, a feeling of woman rolling over her body and through her mind and within her like a fog that penetrated and absorbed and brought mystical wonder with its touch. There was no clumsiness from that racked body slowly joining to hers. Even his pain was a joy for them both, his struggles not to be imprisoned by his infirmities. All was love. She reacted, she responded, she gave utterly of herself, and individual movements flowed into a single creation of love across the pillows and that rug, and then she felt the muscles through his body hardening, his breath dragged into laboring and tortured lungs. And now, without his knowing, she could move to ease this wonder for them both, and he moaned, and the sweat poured from him, and all the weeks and all the months and all the years erupted from him in a violent, stabbing, explosive orgasm, and he screamed in the wrenching, sweet pain of total release. He eased down from his savage heat without knowing, without awareness, reduced to utter limbo in his mind, and slipped into a coma, and from that state of unawareness, of the loss of consciousness, was deeply, uncaringly asleep. For an hour, perhaps 2, she didn't know and cared not at all. The only sign of life from her man was deep, undisturbed breathing. He awoke, unmoving, his only physical action at the confused opening of his eyes. His only physical action, the confused opening of his eyes. He looked at her, and he remembered, and he understood it all. He raised himself to one elbow and looked across the pillows at her. Then, slowly, beautifully, he winked. "If you smoke a cigar now," she said, "I'll kill you." He bit her on the neck, and their laughter was crystal. Chapter 17. "I haven't been this hungry in years," he said, toast in one hand, sausage speared on his fork. He lifted his third cup of coffee, sipped the hot liquid, stuffed his mouth again. "You mumblin'," Lee told him. "Oh," he said. She rolled her eyes in mock despair, brought her coffee up slowly, cradling the cup in both hands. He ate like the Lance of old, grinning between bites, anxious to clean his plate as if it might get away from him if he delayed. Finally he was done, leaning back in his chair, his grin wrapped about a fresh cigar.
My God, I don't believe I ate the whole thing.
He belched.
Watch it. That'll put out the cigar.
He patted his stomach.
Worth it.
He still had that foolish, happy grin of his. The lines of his mouth narrowed slowly. He studied her with sudden alertness.
Something's wrong,
he observed. She shook her head, her hair gleaming in the morning sunlight through the kitchen window.
Nothing so bad it can't wait. This is all too wonderful for...
She smiled.
Later.
He didn't reply for several moments. Cigar smoke wreathed his features.
That isn't your style, he said after the pause. Let's have it.
His brow furrowed.
Was it anything last...
Last night? She finished hurriedly for him. God forbid. Of course not. It's not a tragedy, Lance.
Then spill it.
She leaned full back in her chair and sighed.
All right. It's mundane, prosaic, but the kind of bullshit that won't go away.
Jesus, you're dragging it out.
She nodded.
I thought that if I ignored it long enough, well, you know.
The hell I do,
he said with a touch of exasperation. She held a level gaze with his own.
All right. The long and short of it is that we're broke.
He blinked several times. It didn't register at first. He hadn't even thought of this subject for... It sank home then. He hadn't thought of money for years, literally. Broke. The till was tapped. Where had his mind been all this time? He knew, but it didn't do any good to realize the fact after the fact.
How bad?
He asked finally.
Busted. Flat. Cleaned out. Bare cupboard. Empty purse and pockets.
He was still riding high enough to coast on his good feelings. Short, huh? She shook her head.
Not short. Stubbed out. Flat, like I said.
She became serious.
The fact of the matter is that a healthy bank balance is a velvet lining. I've worn mine out. The cabinet shelves have only splinters left.
Just how much do we have left?
He was coming down fast now.
Loose change.
What happened?
His eyes flicked from the kitchen to his right, to the home, to the laboratories, to the staggering power bills, taxes, equipment by the truckload, food, expenses, medical treatment, tests, travel, professional help. He could add to the litany if he exercised a modicum of plain old common sense. Someone had bought the groceries and the clothes and the gasoline and paid for the cars and...
I see you just added it up,
she remarked, judging his thoughts from the changing expressions of his face.
Yeah, rude awakening, he agreed. Christ, I'm sorry, Lee. How could I have been so blind? I mean, I'm a big boy. I knew money's not from trees.
He shifted position in his chair.
Come to think of it,
he said, thinking as quickly as he could unravel memories too long put aside,
how did you manage all this time?
Another memory stepped forward in his head.
You haven't been working,
he announced aloud, knowing the statement was more for his own benefit than hers.
I've been working,
she contradicted him. She stared into her coffee.
That's not what I meant.
I know. I didn't mean to sound the martyr. We've made it all this way because I had a very fat bank account, lover. Very fat indeed. Then royalty checks have been coming in steadily, and then I was able to borrow. And finally, I managed to get some heavy advances on future contracts. But, she shrugged.
More goes out than comes in.
My accountant and my lawyer, she added, refer to it in kind terms as a negative checkbook. My lawyer has been very active. I don't even know all of the collection agencies after me. He's kept them at bay. But that gets tough with the infernal revenue service.
He smiled at her shift in description.
How infernal is the internal?
They've been trying to seize my property. Monty's held them off. He doesn't know how much longer. They want to grab all this," she said, gesturing to include the house and the lab.
Can he hold them off? I mean, how long enough for you to get back into the swing of things?
She eyed him carefully.
"What does that mean? What does that mean?"
she asked, a bit more harshly than she had intended. But she knew in what direction this conversation was moving, and she didn't like the words, the meaning, or their inevitable end.
It means precisely what it sounds like it means, he said matter-of-factly. Money doesn't grow on trees. There's no secret admirer filling your bank account. I'm not the only broke but a drain. I'm not only broke, but a drain. I don't know how to read. I'm not only broke, but a drain. The government screwed me. Screwed me. Us, really. The insurance company was backed up by the government, and they got off laughing. They must have laughed pretty hard when they tore up my policies.
"Is that bitterness I detect?"
He studied his dead cigar.
Once, he said with a shrug, but not for some time now.
He brought up a lighter in a strong, gnarled hand.
I graduated, remember? Ain't no use getting mad. It's a whole hell of a lot better getting even.
"I do have a way out,"
she said quietly.
I'm listening. I'd also like to know what I can do to help.
"I have a new contract from the Disney people. At least they're offering me a new contract. They opened a Disneyland in Tokyo, about a year ago, and the Japanese, to put it in un-Disney-like terms, have gone apeshit over the automated human systems. They want me to design a complete diorama for the Japanese project and also start on plans for another one in South America."
He looked puzzled.
That's great. Why the sour face?
I have to get cracking immediately."
Jesus, do it.
"You don't understand. There's a trade exhibition opening in San Francisco, and they also want a diorama. But I have to start on it within the next 2 or 3 days, or I lose the contract."
Her eyes were pleading.
"It means I've got to leave for weeks, maybe even months."
Does it get you out of the hole? Come on, Lee, straight out.
Her voice was so low he barely heard her reply.
"Yes."
Then there's no question, is there?
"I don't want to stop what we're doing, Lance. We've come so far, and—"
Hold it, please, baby. You just said the magic words. Look, we've come a long way, and there's been more to go. And there's more to go. But the worst is behind us. You've been wiping my nose and playing nursemaid to my busted ego for a long time. We can't avoid the realities, Lee, and in the system under which we live, the long green is what makes things go round and round. We've made a dream come true because of what you did. No, don't interrupt me. This has got to be said out loud because life itself can bring you down from the biggest high there is. You're broke, the creditors are banging on the doors, and your lawyer is dazzling the opposition with fancy but temporary footwork. You have the way out. There's no choice. I've got to get off your back.
He regretted his last words as quickly as he said them. Sorry about that. He regretted his last words as quickly as he said them, but the more he thought of that sentiment, "I've got to get off your back," the more he realized how true were those words. There's an old saw, he reflected in the long silence between them, that the real heroes in life aren't found on battlefields. They're the people who awaken to bleakness and problems and plotting that simply won't go away because life is more than a series of valiant bugle calls and charges. It's getting up every damn day and facing the grim reality of cleaning a man's body, trying to rebuild a shattered wreck, fighting his own mind as well as her own problems, dedicating herself, giving everything of herself. Her, this woman, this magnificent human being, with her back bent badly beneath the weight of problems of which he hadn't even been aware. He chewed on the one thought. He chewed on the one thought that rolled around in his head like a broken medicine ball, heavy and rumbling and erratic. The same thought he had voiced aloud. Get off her back. Give her breathing room. It felt unreal, impossible, that the miracles Grazzi had wrought in her automated exoskeletal human designs could be brought to a halt in such a fashion, but cash flow for technological development is just as critical as is water flow for irrigation. Somebody had to pay the piper, and Lee had been doing all the paying for them both. Well, sport, listen to your own words. Get off. The gravy train has just come to its last stop. It's time to earn your own keep. Lee saw his thoughts in his facial expression.
I know you, Lance. I know you perhaps better than you think, and what you're thinking is not the way to go.
She slammed her hand on the table, sending dishes and silverware rattling. Her voice rose as her anger ascended swiftly.
God damn it, I haven't gone through the last 2 years to let some stinking petty cash get between us now. Stop being Sir Galahad and start thinking reality. We're a team, and we're a beautiful team, and we love each other, and...
And you need room to breathe, he said slowly. I know what you're thinking. We both know each other too well to play the game. You have a shot at getting your fiscal nose clean. Jesus, love, you gave me my life back to me. What's wrong with our both taking a break for a while? I've got a long ways to go. I want to experiment. She shook her head, close to tears of frustration.
Damn it, if you could work with me on the Disney project. But it but but it's a design. I'm not gonna do the construction and assembly.
Oh, sorry. It is design, not it is the design. Never mind.
Damn it, if you could work with me on the Disney project. But it's design. I'm not gonna do the construction and assembly. It's all head work. But I've just got to be there. Why can't you stay here, Lance? There's still so much work to do.
She rushed on in fear he would produce some argument that would draw him further from her.
Damn it, there's got to be something you can do that will let you work on the ManFac designs and also let you help with the bread and butter. You know, I just thought, well, we could work with the government and...
No. Short, quiet, and implacable from his tone. His hand gripped hers. The government? The word was a loathsome profanity to him. Haven't you learned your lesson yet? You can't trust those bastards. They have no sense of decency. The word loyalty to them is something spoken in a foreign language. Where would you begin? How would you work with them? The moment those sons of bitches find out what you've got here in the ManFac system, they'll...
What we have in this system, you mean?
She broke in, her eyes snapping. So much the worse, then. Remember me? They sacrificed me to the wolves once. They'd like nothing better than to rake me over the coals again. I told you. I'm telling you again. Once those animals find out what you have here in ManFac, they'll drop a mountain on you just like the one that buried my ass. They'll invoke some national security regulation they keep handy for moments just like this one, and they'll take over. We wouldn't have a chance. Right out on our ear, and we couldn't do a thing about it. We couldn't even go to court, for Christ's sake, if they used the gambit of national security. They'd hogtie and gag us, and that would be the end of that. No way. They'd... She held up a hand to stem the flood of anger, and she nodded slowly.
I can't argue with you about the government.
Sometimes we have a difficult time, even when we're having fun. Silence eased between them once more, leaving them to their own thoughts. They needed more time for that, and they both recognized the need.
Lance,
She waited until he looked at her.
can we, sort of put this aside until tonight? I know we've got to come to a decision of some kind, but I was planning something. A surprise for you. I still have a few hours' work to do, and...
Her eyes widened, and she froze as the floor beneath them vibrated. He felt it also. They heard a rattling of dishes and glasses, and then it went quiet. That was a warning, he said quietly.
I know.
Everything else had been forgotten with that ominous rolling, vibrating sensation. She looked around.
It stopped.
He nodded slowly, warily. Yeah. He was breathing deep and slow, every movement measured with animal caution.
Lance, you all right? I mean,
No, no, I'm fine. He reassured her quickly. It's not the same as being under the mountain. He was also looking about him. But you're right. It was just a tremor. She plunged right in.
you're the expert on quakes in this family? You're the expert on quakes in this family. Is there more coming?
He was climbing to his feet. No way to tell. I'll call the seismology lab in Sacramento and see if there's any pattern to it. She nodded.
Good. I'll be getting dressed, and then I'll be in the lab. Oh, by the way, I don't want you in there until I give you the word.
He wouldn't mess up her plans with demanding questions. Besides, he'd been less than completely open with Lee. He had his own plans, his own inner determination to take off for a final test of himself and on his own. So he let it ride. He let the severe emotions of the moment, the earth tremors and their possible consequences, dominate their conversation. Okay, he said easily. I'll be in your office. The confrontation of fiscal crunch started out as a damper for the day, but they had been through too many of life's obstacles to stay down for long. Lee disappeared into her laboratory with the doors closed behind her. Lance had a brief conversation with the seismology crew in Sacramento. He was less than pleased with what he heard.
There's no way to tell, Mr. Parker,
He was told by a technician.
we're in an unstable area, and
I don't want to sound short.
He broke into the telephone exchange.
But I know that. We all know that. What I want to know is if today's shock shows any indications of continuing. I mean, was it dislocation well below ground, or simply a shear shift, or what?
I'm sorry, sir, you're asking me to predict a roll of the dice. Unfortunately, we don't have any prophets in this office, and anything I would say, in the absence of any real indications, would be, well, I guess you could call it theoretical hearsay. I don't think that's what you want.
No,
Lance said.
thanks anyway.
Just a moment. Where are you calling from?
We're high. We're high. In fact, we're on a ridge pretty well inland.
Then I wouldn't worry. But at least you won't have any mountains falling on you. Bye.
Lance went cold with those words.
If you only knew.
He murmured at the dead telephone. He shook off the sudden chill and went to the bar. A good stiff drink would help. He took it straight, then poured another shot of scotch into a mug of steaming coffee, and balanced his drink precariously to his drafting table. Balanced his drink precariously to his drafting. Shouldn't it be on his drafting table? Whatever. He took it straight, then poured another shot of scotch into a mug of steaming coffee and balanced his drink precariously to his drafting table. Ideas had been swirling about in the back of his head ever since his excursion into Stanley and that glorious melee of busting bones and heads in that bar. The rest of the day went by with surprising swiftness as his mind transferred concepts and proposals to paper. Lee's voice brought him out of his deep preoccupation. He looked up to see her smiling.
That apron,
He said in reference to her attire.
You starting dinner?
Not starting. Finished. It's ready. Do you realize it's dark outside?
Her smile broadened.
Apparently, work's good for the soul.
He stretched and shook his head.
No wonder I ache. I've been out there 6 hours.
He was immensely pleased with the day. He'd made significant progress. He was getting a better grasp on improvements for the ManFac system. He climbed slowly to his feet and leaned on his cane.
You got a hungry man on your hands, ma. You got a hungry man on your hands, ma'am,
he drawled. He devoured his steak and home fries and topped off the meal with black coffee. He rounded out the repast with a slim cigar. I would think you'd be really cautious about anything that could cause you cancer down the road, but you got blasted with a zillion rads and somehow medical science of this hypothetical future present managed to cure you of that. So I guess you wouldn't care. I think I've made that comment already. It was the 80s. It was a different time. Uh, he eyed Lee carefully.
You ought to play poker, he said. You can keep a secret better than anyone I know.
His remarks delighted her.
I do have something special. It's a new ManFac. I'd like you to become this one without looking first.
He nodded.
Lead on,
He said, and followed her into the lab. A ManFac stood supported beneath its overhead supports, but every visible part of the system was covered with hanging drapes. He removed his clothing and went easily into the ManFac. By now, changing from Lance Parker to, well, to whatever she'd created, was a move he made easily and quickly. There was that extraordinary sensation, again, of shifting personality and body once he was within the system. He settled in comfortably.
Okay, I'm ready,
He told her. He pressed the power switch beneath a finger. The magic wand passed over him. He could feel, even without any further movement, the tremendous strength that had become a part of him.
Seal
Up, please, she instructed.
He pressed the power system again, and the entry area of head, torso, and legs sealed up behind him. He was no longer occupying a ManFac. The miracle had happened. The Gestalt was real. There was only one personality, one body, one entity.
I'm turning out the lights, Lee told him.
She sounded as happy and pleased as a child.
Then I'm removing the cover. Just hang in there for a moment.
The lab went dark, and he felt the heavy drapes being removed from his body.
All right, Lance, I'm bringing in the lights slowly. The mirrors are right in front of you.
He saw only a shadowy form as she turned the lights up to their lowest level. A powerful shadow, if there could be such a thing. He strained to see better, but there was no rushing her. And then he stared, caught completely by surprise, as the lights came up to full brightness, and he was still staring when he gasped. A powerful young black man stared back at him.
My God, I don't believe it. Lee, this is incredible.
He moved, and the strong young man moved, and they were the same. He went closer to the mirror. A deeply toned brown skin, short curly hair, a rugged face. He wore snug jeans and boots about a slim waist. And a weightlifter's body moved rippling muscles before him.
Somehow Logan fits you, he heard Lee saying. Logan Scott. That's your name on your security pass for this lab, and your driver's license, and the rest of those things inside your wallet.
She hesitated.
How do you like yourself, Logan Scott?
He bent, twisted, moved swiftly, turned slowly.
Marvelous. Absolutely freaking marvelous. You sure do good work for a honky, woman.
She laughed.
This is just part of it, Mr. Scott.
She stepped to the side and pulled away a concealing drape. In their cubicles stood a hulking, bearded Swedish seaman, a huge Japanese with a startlingly large stomach and shaved skull, and, finally, a thick-necked young German. He studied them carefully, life forms awaiting the touch of life. He turned back to Lee.
I don't know what to say, really.
You don't need to. I can see it in your eyes.
She clasped her hands together, sharing the moment with him.
This was my surprise. Not just the systems, but the fact that you now have something, you and ManFac as a single being, that no one else in the world can have. Something that makes you so special, so different. Lance, don't you see it?
She clapped her hands in delight.
You can be anybody you want to be. You're the man who could be anybody, or anyone, she amended. You can live just about any life you choose, and you can shift from one to the other. You can be anybody, and you can be as anonymous as you select to be.
He turned to her again and held out those marvelous, powerful young black arms.
Come here, love.
She ran to him, cradled in his strength, her head resting against the broad chest.
You're incredible, he said quietly. Just incredible. I don't know how you do it, but you. The tremendous earth shock jerked the floor out from beneath them. His voice froze as the savage jolt hurled him from his feet, and he twisted desperately to keep from falling onto Lee. One arm stiffened to absorb the fall, and as he half rolled, now to protect her, he felt the new sound, the grinding rumble building to a roar. Glass and metal and wood were breaking all about them, and directly before his eyes a wall split open in a long, jagged tear. Thunder from far below hammered at them. "Outside!" he shouted. "Let's get the hell out of—" He didn't make it. Another terrible blow rolled through the hills, and the earth danced in its agony of spasms, and he threw himself over her body as the roof collapsed. He felt a chunk of concrete slam into his back, and even that splendid system could not keep the pain from reaching the inner body. But Lee was safe. He turned his head. The wall that had split was now tumbling outward, and the rest of the roof was coming down. He was on his feet swiftly, still protecting Lee, dragging and carrying her through a doorway that fell with a crash just as he made it outside the building. All about them, the earth screamed. Chapter 18. He stood like a hulking monster, covered with dust and bits of plaster, holding her tightly to him. Lee had gone numb at the sight of her beloved laboratory and home collapsing in wreckage, a tumbled monument to years of total dedication. Lance turned her slowly, pointing. "We're lucky," he said simply, and her eyes followed his gesture. In the distance below them, they saw the intense flashing of power lines torn down and arcing. Green fire speared the night sky as transformers exploded. Yellow and orange flames began to appear along roads where there were individual houses. The flames leaped to trees and grass and would become raging fires running loose along the steep slope. But up here they were safe. The ridge ran long and wide and provided protection from even the worst of the fires that might come their way. Lance looked around the horizon, seeing the same signs of erupting fires everywhere. He turned back to Lee. "It's over."
A moan escaped her lips as she stared at what had been her home and laboratory. I know, she said quietly.
"That's not what I meant. The earthquake. It's over. That tremor this morning. That was the warning. This is the result. I know this kind of shock. Somewhere the fault had too much pressure, and it adjusted itself. The shock was the result. There won't be any more. I mean, nothing strong."
She had turned back as flames speared upward in the distance. What about that? She asked.
"It's not the flames that worry me, but if it rolls up this slope on either side, and if there's any kind of a strong wind, the heat and smoke could be damn dangerous. Our best bet is to get down from here and make it to some relatively open areas. They'll be evacuating people any way they can because of the fire danger, so there won't be that much time to waste. We'd better move."
He glanced down at his own body and then at Lee.
"And we need some clothes. I'll go back in for them. You wait here."
I'd better go with you. My purse, cards, money,
"You stay here," he said firmly, blocking her way with a powerful arm. "That whole place could come down around our ears, and I can handle that a lot better than you can. Now wait for me."
He was back in several minutes, carrying a shirt and leather jacket for himself and a jacket for Lee, as well as her purse and some personal belongings he'd seen in the rubble. Lee pointed down the mountains. It's spreading faster than I thought, she said. See that road? We'd have to go through there with the car.
He shook his head. "No way. The flames will be there before we will. We walked down."
She stared doubtfully down along the darkened and precipitous wooded slopes.
He grinned. "Don't forget who you're with, lady. Logan Scott, remember?"
She smiled wanly as she slipped into her jacket.
I guess I forgot something,
she said, her voice self-accusing. He waited out her thoughts.
All I could think of was getting out of here because of the danger. But there must be so many people hurt. And, Lance, they'll need me down there.
He squeezed her hand gently. Then we'd better move out. It was a tough descent, and she would never have made it safely without the brute strength of the ManFac with her. As it was, she lost a shoe, and tree branches and brambles made a wreck of her clothes, as they did of his. Several times she fell, and only that powerful arm kept her from tumbling dangerously into God knew what rocks or trees. All about them they heard animals scurrying through the darkened woods, fleeing the growing flames. Sirens sounded thinly across the mountains, seemingly to float on the night air from every direction, and they saw headlights mixed in with the garish hue of the spreading flames. They emerged from thick underbrush onto a road winding along the mountain and smelled the smoke already rushing before the wind. Lee stood rooted to the ground, then pointed.
Lance, that fire? Do you see it?
She looked up at him with an anguished cry.
It's the school! A girls' school and church, and it's on fire! Lance, go on ahead of me. I'll be safe along the road. Please, do what you can.
He hesitated only a moment, kissed her on the cheek, and took off down slope at a dead run, his weight of more than 300 pounds crashing through the thick growth. Branches kept tearing at his clothes and skin, but he felt no pain or even a scratch in the ManFac. Despite the power systems, his own body provided the basic impetus to his movements, and he was breathing hard, sucking in air, when he burst out of the heavy growth onto the leveled area, where the school and church presented a catastrophic sight. The adjoining structures had been ripped up by the quake, walls broken and tilted crazily with chunks of concrete strewn through the area. Thick smoke poured from the crazy quilt buildings, and he saw tongues of flames mixing with the headlights and searchlights of cars and trucks. An assortment of men, teachers, nuns, and children struggled with hoses, from which water trickled ineffectually. The pressure was gone, and the lines from the water tower, which by some miracle was still standing, had been broken. Lance saw men trying to break through the rubble of the school entrance. A slim hand was suddenly upon his arm, and he turned to look at the grief-stricken face of a nun.
Please, you're strong. Please help me,
she begged, her other hand fluttering at the knot of men struggling to fight their way into the tottering building.
In God's name, sir, there are more than 50 young girls trapped inside there, with the flames. Please!
He jerked free of her arm, and his feet pounded against the asphalt of the drive. Without conscious thought of anything but this moment, this need, his powerful hands tore at chunks of concrete and flung them away, ripped free jammed timbers. The bloodied rescuers stared in awe at the human battering ram thrust suddenly into their midst. Lance saw their stares, and rage filled him.
Get to it, damn it! Move! Clear away this stuff!
He turned back, pulling, tugging, ripping a pathway clear, ignoring the smoke now pouring from the building. Thin screams and cries of pain and fright reached him. He tried to see the children. There was some light from the fires, but the thick smoke thwarted his attempts to get within. He turned back to the entrance.
Get me some lights, quick, and get a hose in here.
Again he turned and went inside the building, stepping over wreckage. A huddled form lay at his feet. He scooped up an unconscious child, ran to the narrow entrance, and thrust the body at another man. Back inside the smoke, he shouted,
Come toward my voice! That's it, come toward me! Hurry!
Another man was by his side with a powerful flashlight. It acted as a beacon. Several children stumbled toward him, toward the light. He passed them on to the other rescuers. He was kicking his way through the wreckage, the smoke blinding, embers flying about him. There was no time to be gentle. Wherever he saw or felt a body, he scooped up a child, one in each arm, and forced his way back to the entrance, where there were now more lights and a spray of cooling water. 10, 20, more than 30 children were dragged and pulled and carried from certain death to the line of men who continued the rescues. There were more. He grabbed a flashlight, plunged back into the smoke. Weak voices guided him, a hand raised above the rubble, a torn white dress. Each caused a frenzied hurling aside of splintered wood and glass and stones, and another stumbling rush back to the entranceway. Again he returned, this time farther into the building, where he found several terrified children huddled in a group within a storeroom that had so far staved off the flames. He couldn't carry them all. They looked as if they could walk.
Hurry! He called to them. Follow me. We can get out if you hurry.
He scooped up a bleeding, fear-frozen youngster and started back. Screams tore at him as a wall collapsed in a great shower of blazing sparks. He turned, horrified, as he saw a thick pipe erupting from the broken ground, lifting up into the air. Even as he shouted, "Down! Get down!" and dropped his body over the child in his arms, the ruptured gas main exploded with a deep, booming roar. In that last instant he remembered to snap shut the clear covers over his eyes and seal off the ManFac, activating the solid oxygen system. Flames ravaged the remaining children, setting them ablaze where they stood, human torches dancing and shrieking madly as fire seared their lungs and stabbed their eyes and enveloped their skin. The explosion killed them where they stood or hurled the small bodies with terrible impact against the wreckage. Lance lay flat on the ground as fire tore past him, and wreckage pounded his body. Time ground to a stop, and then resumed its passage in soul-shattering slow motion as the explosion slowed to a hissing roar, and he saw the skin and clothes and hair of the children become an all-encompassing fire, and he reached instinctively to save them, and froze as several bodies whirled and bounced across his own body in their ghastly incineration. And then there was the final blast, the ultimate thunder that blew out another wall and tore up the ground beneath, and Lance felt his own form flying madly through the air, exploded upward and outward, encased in flaming debris, and flung beyond the collapsing structure, beyond the chain-link fence at the edge of the school grounds, where the earth dropped away sharply. He felt the fence breaking and 1,000 hammers slamming at him, and then an incredible blow as he struck a tree, spun wildly off the bending wood, and crashed downslope through heavy undergrowth. He came to a stop in near darkness, fighting for air, pain stabbing through every muscle and bone, and sank into darkness. Lee had arrived just moments before the final tearing explosion. Teeth biting into her knuckles, she had watched in horror as flames speared outward from the erupting building, and then, with a blast of fire and smoke and a ground-shaking crash, the remaining walls had collapsed onto the children still within the school, burying Lance with them in that sea of fire and wreckage. She had heard someone screaming, and her voice had choked off as she recognized the sound from her own throat. She saw blood on her hands where her teeth had ripped her own skin. She started forward when hands gripped her shoulders, and she turned to look into the soot-streaked face of a nun. "God help you if there was someone you loved in there," she heard. Her hand motioned weakly, and the hands gripped her more tightly. "And God knows the children that man saved need all the help they can get if they're going to live. Can you help? Do you know something about first aid?" "Yes," Lee said weakly. "Then hurry." Chapter 19.
I think I'm dead.
He lay absolutely still, afraid to move, not sure he could, even if he so desired.
But if I'm dead, why the hell do I hurt so much?
The thought brought a giggle up from his throat and a stab of new pain everywhere.
This is ridiculous.
He forced his mind to go blank, to let everything loose so he could start over again.
My name is Lance Parker, and the hell it is. Logan Scott's the handle, and don't you forget it.
He laughed aloud with the thought, and it all flooded back to him. Well, he'd learned for sure that being sealed within the ManFac wasn't any guarantee for escaping the bruises and groans of physical abuse. It was like going over Niagara Falls in a plush barrel, double chambered, fitted out with harness restraints and thick padding and a pressurized compartment. The works. You were still going to take your lumps because there was a physiological reality Lance hadn't considered. Acceleration. That was one of the nasty keys. If you're going so many miles an hour in a direction and you come slamming to a stop, there's no way you don't pay the piper. Even if you stop in a ManFac that can take the bruises without so much as a twinge, you have body liquids that have gained mass from your momentum, and when you stop, they want to keep going in the same direction, and that means broken blood vessels and a severe impact on the heart and the air pounded out of your lungs, and all those whirling stars before your eyes. You can't escape an inescapable force. The ManFac took the brunt of the punishment in the form of physical blows. A fist to the jaw of the ManFac wouldn't really hurt the jaw of Lance Parker residing within, but if there were a sudden snapping motion, his own head would undergo acceleration and all its resultant problems.
But without this ManFac, I'd be squashed flat and torn wide open. Thank you, old buddy.
He sat up slowly to take stock of himself. He held out his arms. Caked blood. Blood? Sure, he realized. That artificial blood Lee had designed into the system so that to an observer a cut would appear to bleed. But there was human blood on him as well. That child in his arms when the explosion ripped through. He climbed to his feet. Hey, everything worked. He slid back a panel on his forearm just above the inside of his wrist, pressed a button, saw miniature instruments flashing digital reports on the ManFac system to him. Damn, he'd forgotten. He punched off the oxygen system, released the eye covers, and opened the suit ports. The cold night air reached him, and he drank deeply and went into a coughing spasm from the smoke filtering through the slopes. Sounds filtered to him. Sirens across the hills, voices far above him where pain and death and misery stalked the remains of the church and school. Something tugged at his mind. He again studied the suit status report. The ManFac had barely an hour of full energy remaining. If he didn't recharge the system or replace the power packs, he'd have no choice but to return to what he was, semi-crippled, clad only in underclothes, and nearly helpless on a cold mountain slope. His thoughts centered suddenly on Lee. Where was she? Was she safe? Had something happened to her? He cut himself off in mid-sentence.
Stick to what's immediate, what's critical.
With just that 1 hour of power remaining in the ManFac system, he didn't have the time to go traipsing about the countryside looking for Lee. He couldn't help her with rampant emotionalism.
Always consider the alternatives.
He had no choice but to trust to the fates until he could do something about Lee, and hope fervently she had made it. His survival syndrome took over his thinking, cleared his mind, made him objectively judge his situation. He looked about him. He didn't want to return to the mob at the remains of the school. There would be too many questions and too much attention. Down below, then. Roads wound their way through these hills and mountains. He saw headlights, and he had his direction, moving steadily down through the heavy growth of the steep slope. He emerged on the road a garish figure, a powerful black man with clothes torn and singed. He wished desperately for a car to show up. Several cars rushed by, their headlights illuminating his great bulk, but the drivers continued on. Every minute ticked away in his head like a time bomb reaching its penultimate moment of disaster.
God damn it, it.
It does say, God damn it, it. I don't know why. So it's supposed to just be,
God damn it.
He was determined to stop the next car if he had to stand in the middle of the road like a bull. He saw headlights coming around the turn below him, and he stood in the road's center, his arms wide, signaling. A pickup truck screeched to a halt, and a voice shouted at him, "You crazy or something? I almost hit you!" Lance, Logan Scott, walked up to the driver's side and saw an older black man returning his gaze. The driver shook his head. "Man, I don't know who you are or even... What the hell happened to you?"
I was up at that school, Lance said. Tried to help him. Then some explosion. I'm not sure.
The man studied him briefly.
Les Seaver is my name. Get in.
He waited until the giant black was seated next to him and started off along the road.
You hurt? You sure as hell look like you've been through the grinder.
Lance shook his head.
Some. Not too bad. But I need help.
A sudden, sharp glance.
You in trouble? You running? Don't sweat it, brother. Just keep it on top of the table with me. It's straight, man, Lance said. It may even sound crazy. I need juice.
Seaver's eyes widened, then narrowed.
You crazy like this because you're on the sauce? Don't sound right to me.
No, nothing like that. I told you it's crazy. It's really funny because now, like, in the smartphone era, everyone's like, oh, yeah, you need a power hookup. No problem. But back then, it is a rather uncommon request.
No, nothing like that. I told you it's crazy.
He looked straight ahead.
Hell, I don't know. What you need is a doctor. I know just where. No doctor.
Seaver nodded slowly.
Okay, brother, however you want it, but you're going to have to wait some before we can do anything. I work for the county, and everything that can move is on emergency call.
He pointed along the road.
County garage is just down there. I got to pick up some emergency gear and get it to an evacuation center, but it's safe here. You can wait or come along. Nobody's going to be here except them folks picking up supplies. Anybody questions you, just tell 'em my name.
Lance nodded.
All I need is some rest.
He paused.
The garage have power? The lines were down everywhere I looked. We got it. Generating station of our own.
Seaver pulled into the county garage, backed the truck to a loading platform.
You okay enough to give me a hand?
Sure.
Got to load blankets, 200 of 'em.
Seaver's eyes widened as heavy boxes of blankets seemed to fly into the truck bed. He studied the stranger.
Never did get your name, brother.
Logan Scott.
Well, Logan Scott, you just rest easy here and wait for me. Most of the roads are down, so I'll arrange to get some food into your belly.
Seaver waved goodbye and drove off. 20 minutes. Jesus, only 20 minutes. He heard a gasoline-driven generator banging away somewhere in the building, and the lights were on. Juice. Electricity. He had 20 minutes to go before he wound down like a toy soldier. He slipped into a back storeroom, thanked the deities for a sign, and found it, a wall receptacle in a corner of the room. He wedged the door shut, slid to the floor, and opened a panel in his rib cage. He extracted the slim plug and power cord and plugged himself into the wall socket. It was an incredible experience. A transfusion of energy. IV into the ribs. Life flowing through a cord. He sat quietly, knowing he must remain this way for at least 4 hours to regain a full charge. Maybe Seaver would be a whole lot busier than he'd planned. Lance shifted position to be more comfortable. Minutes later, he was fast asleep.
Maybe he's in here. Goddamn door's stuck. You guys give me a hand, will you?
Lance came awake with a start. He glanced at his wristwatch. Nearly 5 hours had gone by. He looked up at the door, heard the voices closer, felt the door tremble as several men on the other side pushed against it. Swiftly, Lance unplugged, let the inertial reel snap the wire back into place, and slid the ribcage panel closed. He let his head droop as the weight of the men shoved the door open.
In here! He's in here!
A hand touched him gently. Lance feigned deep sleep, came out of it groggily.
Give me that damn bottle. He needs a drink bad.
Seaver hunched down near him, close, eye to eye.
Here, do it slow. Just a short one. Snap a bit inside you.
Lance nodded slowly, held the bottle. Whatever it was in there went down like honey fire. It did snap something inside him. He opened his eyes wide, saw the circle of men behind Seaver.
Les, that him?
The one asked. Seaver turned his head and nodded.
It be him, all right. You people give him a hand getting up. He might be weaving yet.
Lance heard two men gasping with the effort of trying to raise him to a standing position. He tensed his leg muscles to help. A big man released his grip.
You must be made out of solid stone, mister.
Lance grinned at him.
Heavy grits, I guess.
The other man shook his head doubtfully, but shared the grin. He helped Les Seaver guide the powerful young man into the office, where they led him to a chair. Lance sat back and looked up at Seaver.
What the hell's the matter with you people? I ain't no damn cripple.
You hush. Seaver fussed over him. Somebody get a clean shirt back in supply. Get the biggest damn one you can find. Even that ain't gonna be big enough, I suspect.
He turned back to Lance.
Logan Scott, huh?
The dark face creased in a wide smile.
I guess I'm the only one knows your name, Logan, but as sure as God made green apples, the whole damn state of California is trying to find out.
Lance tensed, and Seaver clapped his hand to his shoulder.
Son, we've been looking everywhere for you. Came back here once. Forgot you might have crawled back somewhere to rest. Anyway, TV's full of you. You some kind of very special hero, Logan. You know you saved more'n 40 kids in that church school?
The other men nodded.
One of those kids, said a tall, thin man, was mine. I thank you, mister. More'n I can say.
Lance nodded and turned back to Les Seaver.
I ain't hurt none, he said slowly, but if there's one thing I am, it's hungry.
Seaver grinned hugely.
Figured that might be the case. My woman's got a table heaped high at home. You sure that's all? I mean, you don't need a doctor or nothing?
Food, Lance repeated, sharing the smile. Food and one more thing. It may be strange, but I'd appreciate it. Appreciate it.
He looked around the group, and they nodded.
Just don't tell anyone who I am or where I'm going.
They didn't understand.
But you're a hero, one man protested. And people want to thank you and... Knock it off, Les Seaver broke in. That's his business, not ours. You men doing as he asks?
He waited as they nodded and murmured their assent.
Good. Let's get him out to the truck. Got an empty belly to fill.
3 wide-eyed youngsters stared at him throughout the meal despite admonitions from their mother, and several glares from their proud father. Whimpered asides among the children went between bites, most of the conversation juvenile comparisons between an obvious favorite in this home, Ali, and the stranger.
He got bigger muscles. But Ali, he got bigger hands and he faster. But Logan, man, look, you ever see muscles like that on Ali? No way.
Seaver's patience ran a touch ragged, but Lance favored him with a subtle shake of the head. Seaver smiled and let his kids be. Their mother had little to say. Her husband had told her of the events preceding this visit, and she was content to listen to the 2 men talk. There was little enough of that, no matter how hard she listened.
Never saw you around these parts before,
Seaver prodded gently.
Never been here before,
Lance Logan Scott told him.
I was making a delivery to the laboratory atop the mountain. Earthquake ran my truck off the road. I looked down and saw that school coming apart. Ran down the hill, done what I could.
Seaver shook his head admiringly.
That's all, man. That just done what you could. You were, as the TV is saying, incredible.
They say many things,
Lance replied, smiling.
You drive a truck. I mean, that's your job?
Some, mostly warehouse stuff. But it's the way to learn the business.
Lance was trying desperately to deliver a picture of blandness, but it wasn't working too well, and the last thing he wanted to do was seem off-handed to this wonderful family.
I mean, I want to learn about warehousing, stocking, shipping. It's all going to go to computer, so I study a lot at night.
Study and give you that body, I think I'm going to crack me a big mess of books, Seaver retorted, and they shared laughter.
Well, I do work out some at the gym, and there's surfing, and mostly I run a lot.
You'd be dynamite in the ring.
Lance leaned back.
I don't like fighting.
He said it in such a way as to end that line of conversation. Lance stood up and turned to the woman.
Mrs. Seaver, that was a marvelous meal, and I thank you. Would you mind if your husband and I took coffee outside?
Go ahead, I'll bring it.
They sat on the steps, drinking slowly. Seaver toyed with his cup, finally turned, and held his eyes on Lance.
I don't mean to pry, Logan, but I know men, and you did some storytelling at the table in there. Now hold on, he said, holding up a hand to prevent interruption. Don't take me wrong. What I'm getting at is that if you got some kind of problem and you don't want folks to know where you are, that's good enough for me. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Lance sighed.
Thanks. You're right on the first count, and I'm glad to say you're wrong on the second. Well, that's all I can tell you.
Good enough.
One more favor. Would you drive me a couple of miles from here, let me off your truck, and, as far as the world is concerned, just forget we spent this time together?
They held a long look between them before Seaver nodded slowly.
Okay, he sighed. I don't know what's coming down with you, Logan, or whatever your name might be, but I got the feeling there shouldn't be any more questions.
I appreciate that.
Whatever you want, you got. Those kids in there, he jerked a thumb toward his house, could have been in that school. We'll play it by your rules. I'll tell the wife we're...
Could we just go?
Seaver motioned him to follow to the truck. 10 minutes later, they clasped hands.
You got a funny way of talking for black skin, Logan. All I want for you to know is that if you ever need someone or somewhere, my door is open to you. Peace, brother.
He watched the powerful figure disappear into the shadows of the trees, and then he was gone. Perplexed, Les Seaver drove home, carrying with him the strangest feeling no one would ever again see Logan Scott. His decision was made before he climbed and pulled his way up the mountain slope to reach the now silent wreckage of what had been Lee's expensive home and laboratory. As he'd predicted, the leveled area was safe from fire, but smoke hung thick and heavy along the ridges, and he moved through a smoke fog that became heavier as the night continued. There remained damned little here for Lee to find on her return. She wasn't here now, and Lance didn't expect her to be anywhere but in an emergency hospital attending to the hundreds of injured from the devastating earthquake. So much the better. At this moment, the wreckage was isolated from outside contact. The telephone lines were down, and all roads would be strictly controlled. As he picked his way through the wreckage, he felt it might be a blessing in disguise. Lee was heavily insured, and while nothing could truly replace what she had assembled painstakingly through the years, at least her financial collapse would now be averted. He realized this was also the perfect moment to unshackle himself from her, to give Lee the breathing space she needed, have that shot of rebuilding from the ground up. Do it. No need to obey his inner voice. It was just a matter of translating decision into action. He pulled aside smashed wreckage and broken timbers and great concrete chunks to fight his way into the garage. Dust covered the truck, which had taken its share of knocks and dents, but only surface damage. He cleared away the entrance and pulled the truck around the tumbled mess to where the wall had collapsed. Now it was a matter of steady and meaningful labor. Into the truck went the overhead trestle from which the ManFac systems were suspended in the laboratory. He would not take the ManFac Lance. He wanted only his own true identity or totally different ones. He secured the beams and rods securely to the sides and roof of the truck, and carried first the Japanese ManFac into the vehicle and braced it firmly. The thick-necked German followed next, and when he was in place, Lance tossed a casual salute to two personalities of himself. Back into the wreckage and repeated trips into the truck with power supplies, tools, test equipment, clothing, cables, ManFac system parts, medical kits. Damn, he'd almost forgotten clothing for Lance Parker as himself when he was not a ManFac. Several canes, identification and credit cards, all the cash he could find, a paltry $340.
$7 million in today's dollars.
Actually, if it's 81 with inflation, 340, that's probably close to a bit shy, I think, 1,000. It's probably like $700 to $800 in today's money. I might be wrong. Don't quote me on that. I'm talking out my fundament. Uh, Several canes, identification, and credit cards, all the cash he could find, a paltry $340, driver's licenses, and other papers. Lee had prepared a separate identification packages for each ManFac. He buried them in a padlocked box deep within the truck for later use. It was done. One more step to follow. He returned to the wrecked laboratory and removed himself from Logan Scott. The powerful dark figure stood as he was, a lifeless statue. Lance dragged himself to the figure of the bearded Swedish giant. He struggled into the ManFac, powered the system, and went through that always startling regeneration into a powerful human form. He closed off the entry ports, checked out the ManFac, and slid smoothly into the transition of Sven Anderson. He went through the papers, slid licenses and credit cards made out to the laboratory into his wallet. Keys, handkerchief, comb, cash, the usual, the ordinary, the prosaic. He carried the inert form of Logan Scott into a corner of the lab, moved it carefully within a steel locker, and closed the combination lock. Only Lee, aside from himself, knew the right numbers. And that was his message to her. He had considered a letter to be left for her, or even a tape recording, but dismissed both for a better choice. As soon as she could, Lee would return to the top of the mountain. With only a glance, she would see that 3 ManFacs were missing. When she opened the steel locker and found the form of Logan Scott, she would know. Lance had returned safely to the lab. The ManFacs would be gone, along with documents and papers and the truck. She would read the signs better than any words he might leave for her. It was done. He looked about him slowly. Strange. This had been his womb, and in a very real sense Lee had been his creator. But the cord was cut, frozen in memory, committed totally to the past. Now he must cut the mustard, as both Lance Parker and whatever ManFac he might choose to be. He had what he needed, an open mind with which to start out along an open road. He didn't delude himself that it would be easy.
What the hell, Parker? If it ain't got thorns, it can't be a rose.
Damned right, he said aloud, climbing into the truck and starting the engine. He eased away from the wreckage about him and drove slowly down the mountainside. He didn't look back. And that is where we will call it for today. We will continue it next week, schedule permitting, provided no emergency disasters pop up in the meantime. Yeah, so sorry, I had forgotten that we killed like 10 children in this. 10 dead kids. I had warned in the beginning that there would be rather lurid scenes. We got one of those. And you can now see how it's definitely superhero adjacent power fantasy stuff as well. It's fun. It's a romp. So yeah. There is more book. That was but book 2. It's all in one volume. It's not like an omnibus edition. It's just that's Act 2, I guess you could say. Let me see, what page is that? That's page 230 out to. So where is the next book break? Good question as we flip through the pages here. There we go. Excellent. That is where we will put the next one. So that would be perfect. Glorious. It'll be a short one next week, I guess. Oh, geez, I need to look at my schedule here. That one won't be so bad. The 1st of December, rather, the 2nd of December, sorry, I know how to read calendars. 2nd of December, we'll see. That could be dicey. Hopefully I will be able, I should be able to, but I'm probably going to be in no fit state because I got a lot going on that weekend. Stuff. So yeah, hopefully people enjoyed. I realize I'm kind of stuffy. Comes from being out on the road all Sunday. Dusty dirt roads, doing things, activities of varying stripes, without giving further detail. Yeah. So later this week, we've got more of Bear v. Shark, the novel by Chris Batchelder, a satire on America and our relationship with entertainment, among many other things. We got through a pretty solid chunk last week. We'll see how long it takes to get through this next arbitrary chunk. This may only be 3 parts for that one. Actually, no, I'm going to have to cut the next one in half. One of them in half at some point. But that's okay. And then on Friday, I'm not enunciating well. I think I'm dehydrated. We will be reading through more of The Jesus Incident by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. So, more of that. Let me put in an arbitrary bookmark there. And that should be good. All right. As for future plans, after ManFac, I'm going to coin toss for Mondays whether I do Yukikaze by Chohei Kanbayashi or the first volume of Full Metal Panic. Probably. Yeah. One of those two. I haven't decided which, but those are pretty much a lock. Those are pretty much a lock. I was going sometime this year going to do a read through of at the very least the first of the Robotech novelizations, but then I remember all the, to put it bluntly, fuckery that Harmony Gold has gotten up to over the years with the Macross license, and it just kind of made me mad and not want to do that, which is a shame. Which isn't to say that I don't recommend watching Robotech. It was fine, but don't give Harmony Gold any more money. They don't deserve it. We are supposed to be getting some of Macross, the various Macross series released in the West now officially. Beyond what have we got? We did get, there is a old version of from decades ago of Macross Do You Remember Love, which I don't think has ever had a re-release, but I'm not sure. We've gotten Macross 2, which is 10 side canon, not main timeline canon, and is okay. It's okay. I like a lot of the mech designs and stuff in Macross 2. We've definitely gotten Macross Plus. That was, I think, from ADV Films, I think, did the publishing on that. Has the English dub voice talent of one Bryan Cranston. Some guy, I don't think anybody's ever seen him in a show involving, cooking meth or anything. Certainly not. Or what was it? Malcolm in the Middle? Malcolm in the Middle, yeah. We are slated to get Macross 7 at some point, if that hasn't come out. I'm not actually sure. Let me... Macross 7. Oh, that's right. There's something going on with Disney, and I don't remember what's going on there. And I think it's for like UK licensing. Let's see. Forbes, a lot of Macross anime. Is that by Ollie Barter? It's Ollie Barter. Shout outs to Ollie Barter being like a dude working for Forbes who cares about mecha media. Um, when was this written though? Oh, that was back in March of this year, because there was a big legal kerfuffle where things shook out, and Harmony Gold no longer quite has the death grip that they did have, but it's still their tentacles are still attached to the Macross property, so it makes things difficult. So Disney Plus apparently is getting a bunch of these getting localized, um, but in Japan, not here, which is bloody useless to be honest. Um, I know there was talk. Who was doing the release? There was going to be a physical Blu-ray release of Macross 7, but like it just vanished off the face of the earth. Let me check here. Here we go. I don't necessarily trust Anime News Network, but sometimes they have useful info. No, 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 no. Release dates. No, 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 no. No, that's 95. That's when the show aired. Looking for Western releases. Disney Plus Canada got it, but not the United States. Oh, here we go. Macross 7 Flying Dog announced on Sunday, sometime in October, that Macross 7 will be. Oh, it's some new Macross 7 thing that I forgot was happening. Never mind. That's not it. Anyway, enough harping on about Macross. Uh, good times with transforming fighter jets into giant robots. Good times. Good times. I happen to like Macross 7 quite a bit. I will generally acknowledge its faults. It has a fair amount of stock footage, and it's very like the plot is kind of slice of lifey, and that doesn't always work. Um, but it's also a 50 episode season. Some people claim it drags quite a bit. I'm like, at a certain point, you're supposed to just accept that it's just kind of farting about and having fun and enjoying itself, being semi-formulaic, not trying to be tell a massive story, but it manages to get there in the end anyway. Um, and of course, blasting alien baddies with J Rock, which is pretty cool and funny. He's got a gun, but it shoots speakers. It's a wild show. It's goofy. Oh, here we go. No, 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 no. None of this is helping me. None of this is helping me. Here we go. Nope, that's the Ollie Barter article. Um, and it was going to be from Right Stuff, but I don't think it's come out. I'm going to double check Right Stuff real quick. Of course, they run out of stock on things toot sweet sometimes, so it might have come out and I missed the boat, and I would feel like a goon. I'm still pretty upset that I missed the boat on Zabungle and Space Runaway Ideon, because Zabungle is phenomenal and Ideon is phenomenal. Like if you want great Tamino giant robot anime recommendations, those are two big ones for polar opposite reasons. Macross. Okay, those are kits and toys. That doesn't do me any good. Okay, Macross Zero. Pass. The movie of Macross Plus. That doesn't help me. Oh, wow, they've actually got reprinted omnibus novels for some of the Robotech stuff. That's interesting. I didn't think those were in print. The Shadow Chronicles stuff, what is usually called the Shadow Chronicles? They have another name that I can't remember, which is a bunch of novels after the novelizations that cover the anime that they did, adaptations that Harmony Gold did. Those I don't think any of those have ever gotten reprinted. I have them digitally and I have a couple of them physically, but if I had to go and actually buy them, it would probably cost, unless nobody cares about them anymore, which is also likely. Okay, well, I don't see Macross 7 here anywhere, so maybe the license got pulled? Let's try Macross 7. Macross 7. This is a terrible... Oh, that's right. Crunchyroll bought outright stuff. It's all coming back to me. That's why this interface sucks. It took me a minute. That's right. So that's probably been canned. That's no longer happening, probably. Invective. Let's try back orders. Doesn't help me. Pre-orders, maybe. No, these are kits and toys and shit. I don't care. Series. Macross series. Wow, nice. Useless, but nice. Cool. So I don't know what happened to the Macross 7 physical release that was supposed to happen. Assume it's not happening. Cool. Anyway, sadness and despair. Hey, but at least Discotech has our back, right? There's something that they came out with recently that I still need to get a hold of. What was it? Oh, no, it wasn't. It might have been Dougram was the one that I missed the boat on. Anyway, other series that are worth watching. That one's by what's his name? Ryosuke Takahashi. Watch Armored Trooper Bottoms. I don't say that often enough, but we really, really should say it more often. It's very good. It's pretty wild. It's a fun show. Anyway, that'll do it for me. That's enough harping on giant robots for the moment. Even though that's what Mondays are dedicated to. More or less. I mean, we do mostly powered armor for the last half year. More. Anyway, that'll do it for me. To anybody tuning in for the first time, for whatever reason, hi. If you're wondering why these are so rough around the edges, it's because I do them live with no further editing every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting at 12 p.m. noon U.S. East Coast time, or Eastern Standard, or Eastern Daily Time, whatever time zone. Which is, I realize, not terribly convenient if you want to check me out live. But otherwise, they're all on my YouTube channel, sorted into playlists, usually every month or so. Sometimes I go a bit longer, sometimes I do it a bit shorter, whatever. Call it every month. Yeah. With that, I'm going to leave you all to it. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. I will see you all next time. Toodaloo!